This is King Adebayo, ruler of one of the wealthiest kingdoms in all of West Africa. If you stood at the gates of his palace and looked up, you would see walls covered in gold leaf that shimmered under the African sun like captured fire. His throne room alone could fit 3 entire villages inside it. The floors were made of imported marble from distant lands. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high that birds sometimes nested in the rafters. King Adebayo was 53 years old, and he had never known a single day of poverty in his entire life. He was born into royalty, raised in luxury. Every meal was a feast. Every garment was woven with golden thread. When he walked, servants rushed ahead to lay silk cloths on the ground so his feet would never touch common dirt. But wealth had done something to King Adebayo's heart. It had made it cold, hard, distant from the suffering of his people. Every morning, he would sit on his throne and listen to reports from his advisors. "Your Majesty, the northern villages are struggling with drought." He would wave his hand dismissively, tell them to pray for rain. Next report, "Your Majesty, the orphanage is overcrowded. Children are sleeping 3 to a mat." Another wave, "Not my concern. The church should handle it." Next, "Your Majesty, beggars are increasing in the capital. They are making the streets look unpleasant." This would make him sit up, double the guards, move them outside the city walls. "I don't want to see poverty when I ride through my capital." His advisors would bow and obey. No one dared question the king. No one dared tell him that a ruler's wealth means nothing if his people are suffering. King Adebayo had 3 wives, each living in her own wing of the palace. He had 12 children, each dressed in finer clothes than most people would wear in a lifetime. He had hundreds of servants who cooked his food, cleaned his rooms, and attended to his every need. But he had no friends, no one who truly knew him. No one who could tell him the truth. His first wife, Queen Folklore, was the only person who occasionally tried to reach his heart. She was a woman of great beauty and greater compassion. She came from a noble family, but she never forgot where real happiness came from. One evening in early December, as Christmas preparations began throughout the kingdom, Queen Folklore came to her husband's private chambers. The king was counting gold coins, organizing them into neat piles on an ebony table. "My husband," she said softly, "Christmas is coming. Perhaps this year we could open the palace to the poor. Feed them, show kindness." King Adebayo didn't even look up from his counting. "The poor are always with us, Folklore. If we feed them once, they'll expect it forever. It's better they learn to fend for themselves, but it's Christmas. The celebration of giving, of compassion, of enough." His voice was sharp. "I give taxes to the church. They can handle charity. That's what they're for." Queen Folklore looked at her husband with sadness in her eyes. "When did you become so hard, Adebayo? I remember when we were younger, you used to speak of helping people, of being a king who cared." "I was naive then," he said coldly. "I've learned that kindness is weakness. People take advantage of generosity. Now leave me. I have work to do." The queen left silently, her heart heavy. What King Adebayo didn't know was that his attitude hadn't gone unnoticed. Throughout the palace, servants whispered about his coldness. In the markets, merchants complained about his indifference. In the villages, farmers spoke of his greed, how he took heavy taxes but gave nothing back. The kingdom was wealthy, yes, but the people were not happy. And a kingdom without joy in its people's hearts is just a golden prison. As Christmas approached, the capital city began to transform. Merchants hung colorful lanterns, churches displayed nativity scenes, families prepared special meals, children sang carols in the streets, but in the palace, there was no such warmth. King Adebayo had forbidden elaborate Christmas celebrations. "It's a waste of resources," he declared. Even his own children barely saw him during the holidays. He was too busy managing his wealth, counting his treasures, ensuring no one was stealing from his vast fortune. But something was stirring in King Adebayo's mind, something he couldn't quite explain. Late at night, when the palace was quiet, he would stand on his balcony and look out at his kingdom. He could see the distant lights of the city, hear the faint sounds of celebration. And for reasons he didn't understand, he felt empty. All this wealth, all this power, and yet something was missing. One night, 3 days before Christmas, he had a dream. In the dream, he stood before a great throne, far more magnificent than his own. And a voice spoke to him, "What have you done with what I gave you?" King Adebayo, even in his dream, stood proud. "I have built a great kingdom. I have accumulated wealth. I have maintained order. The voice responded, I asked what you have done, not what you have taken. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was homeless, did you shelter me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? I am a king, Adebayo replied. These things are not my responsibility. Then you are no king of mine, the voice said. And suddenly, in the dream, all of Adebayo's gold turned to dust. His robes became rags. His palace crumbled, and he was alone, with nothing. He woke up gasping, his heart pounding. It was still dark outside. His chamber was silent except for his own rapid breathing. It was just a dream, he told himself, just a meaningless dream. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. The next morning, King Adebayo couldn't focus on his usual duties. The dream haunted him. Those words kept echoing in his mind. When I was hungry, did you feed me? He dismissed his advisors early and sat alone in his throne room. The golden walls that usually filled him with pride now felt suffocating. The jewels on his crown felt heavy, the silk robes felt like chains. Queen Folklore found him there, staring at nothing. My husband, are you unwell? Folklore, he said slowly, not looking at her. Do you think I'm a good king? She was surprised by the question. It was so unlike him to ask for anyone's opinion, let alone question himself. Why do you ask? Answer me honestly. Do the people love me? Or do they only obey me because they fear me? The queen sat down on the steps leading to the throne. She chose her words carefully. They respect your power, Adebayo. They obey your laws. But love, she paused. Love must be earned. And it cannot be bought with gold or enforced with power. Do they think I'm cruel? They think you distant, removed from their struggles. They see the palace walls and assume you don't care what happens beyond them. King Adebayo was silent for a long time. Then he said something that shocked his wife. I want to know the truth. About my kingdom, about my people, but everyone around me only tells me what I want to hear. How can I know the real state of my kingdom? Queen Folklore thought carefully. Then an idea came to her. There is a way. If you truly want to know, tell me, disguise yourself. Go among the people as a common man. See how they treat a stranger. See how they treat someone with no power, no wealth, no title. Only then will you know the true heart of your kingdom. The king's first instinct was to reject this idea. Him, walk among commoners, dress in rags. Impossible, undignified, dangerous, even, but the dream wouldn't leave his mind. When I was hungry, did you feed me? Christmas Eve, he said suddenly. I'll do it on Christmas Eve. That's when people's true characters show, isn't it? If they have kindness in their hearts, it will show on the holiest night of the year. Queen Folklore nodded. It will be dangerous. You should take guards with you, hidden nearby. No, the king said firmly. No guards. If I'm to do this, I must do it completely. I must truly be a beggar, with no safety net, no way to reveal myself if things go wrong. Only then will I see the truth. The queen looked worried but nodded. Then I will help you prepare the disguise. But Adebayo, promise me something. What? Promise me that if you do this, you'll truly see. Don't just look for what confirms what you already believe. Open your eyes, open your heart. King Adebayo nodded slowly. I promise. For the next 2 days, the king prepared in secret. He had his most trusted servant, an old man named Baba Tund, who had served the royal family for 50 years, gather Beggar as clothes. Torn rags, a worn blanket, sandals with holes, the kind of garments the king would normally order burned. On Christmas Eve morning, King Adebayo told his court he was feeling ill and would be confined to his chambers for the day. No one was to disturb him. His food would be left outside his door. In truth, he was preparing for his transformation. Baba Tund helped him. They rubbed dirt into his skin, messed his hair until it was wild and unkempt, dressed him in rags that smelled of poverty. When the king looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. Your Majesty, Baba Tund said quietly, one more thing. He handed the king a small wooden cross on a string. Wear this. Even in disguise, remember who you truly are. King Adebayo took the cross and hung it around his neck, hidden beneath the rags. As the sun began to set on Christmas Eve, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, King Adebayo slipped out of a servant's entrance. For the first time in his life, he walked the streets of his capital not as a ruler, but as the lowest of the low. A beggar, homeless, hungry, alone, and what he was about to discover would change him forever. The capital city of King Adebayo's kingdom was beautiful on Christmas Eve. Lanterns hung from every shop. Churches glowed with candlelight. The smell of roasting meat and baking bread filled the air. Families walked together, dressed in their finest clothes, heading to Christmas services or holiday gatherings. But as King Adebayo walked through these streets in his beggar's rags, no one smiled at him. Mothers pulled their children away when he passed. Men glared at him with suspicion. Women covered their noses as if he carried disease. The king felt something he'd never experienced before: invisibility. He was surrounded by people, yet completely alone. No one saw him as a person. They saw only what he appeared to be: worthless, unwanted, a problem to be avoided. His feet hurt. The sandals with holes offered no protection against the rough stone streets. His stomach growled loudly. He realized with a start that he hadn't eaten since morning, and his body wasn't used to hunger. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to need food, not just want it. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the king began to shiver. His thin rags provided no warmth against the cold December night. He needed shelter. He needed help. He approached the first large house he saw. It belonged to Adekunle, the wealthiest merchant in the capital. The king knew this man well. He paid enormous taxes and always brought expensive gifts to the palace. Surely a man of such means would show kindness to a stranger on Christmas Eve. The house was magnificent, 3 stories tall, with balconies wrapped in Christmas garlands. Through the windows, the king could see a party in full swing. Well-dressed guests laughed and danced. Servants carried trays of food. The abundance was almost offensive to someone standing outside in the cold. King Adebayo climbed the front steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. His knock was weak, uncertain. He'd never had to ask for anything in his life. The door opened. A servant looked out, saw the beggar, and his face immediately twisted in disgust. "What do you want, please?" the king said, and the word felt strange in his mouth. He'd never said please to a servant before. "I'm cold and hungry. It's Christmas Eve. Could I have some food? Or just a place to sit by a fire for a moment?" The servant didn't even consider it. "Wait here." He closed the door. The king stood there, shivering, hearing the laughter from inside. After several minutes, the door opened again. But this time it was the merchant himself, Adekunle. He was a large man, well-fed, dressed in an expensive agbada embroidered with gold thread. His fingers were heavy with rings. A gold chain hung around his neck. When he saw the beggar, his face showed pure contempt. "What is this? You dare come to my home begging on Christmas Eve?" "Sir, I only ask for—" "I don't care what you ask for," Adekunle interrupted harshly. "Do you know how many beggars come to my door? If I fed every worthless vagrant in this city, I'd be poor myself. Now get away from my house before I call the guards." "But it's Christmas," the king said quietly. "The season of giving, of compassion. Christmas is for people who deserve celebration," the merchant snapped. "Not for lazy beggars who refuse to work. Look at you. Young enough to labor, yet you choose to beg. Disgusting." The king tried once more. "I'm not lazy, sir. I'm just—" "Enough." Adekunle's voice rose. Through the windows, guests had stopped dancing and were watching the scene with amusement. The merchant was performing for them now. "You filthy wretch. This is the finest house in the city, and you make it look bad just by standing here. Leave now, or I'll have you beaten and thrown in jail." One of the guests, a woman in an expensive dress, laughed from inside. "Adekunle, you're too kind even talking to him. Just shut the door." The merchant smiled at his guests, then looked back at the beggar with absolute coldness. "You heard the lady. Goodbye," and he slammed the door so hard the frame shook. King Adebayo stood there in the darkness, stunned. He knew Adekunle, had dined with him, had accepted his gifts and taxes, had praised him as a pillar of the community. And this was how he treated the helpless. But more disturbing was the realization dawning on him. He himself had done the exact same thing. How many times had beggars been turned away from the palace gates? How many times had he ordered the poor removed from his sight? How many times had he said almost those exact words: "If I helped every poor person, I'd have nothing left"? He was seeing his own heart reflected back at him, and it was ugly. The king pulled his thin blanket tighter and walked away from the merchant's house. His feet dragged with each step. The physical cold was nothing compared to the chill he felt inside. But he pressed on. Perhaps the church would be different. Surely the house of God would show mercy on Christmas Eve. He had no idea how wrong he was. The Cathedral of the Holy Nativity was the grandest church in the entire kingdom. Its spires reached toward heaven like prayers made of stone. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, every window glowed with candlelight. The sound of the choir singing "O Come All Ye Faithful" drifted through the air, beautiful and haunting. King Adebayo stood at the bottom of the stone steps leading to the massive wooden doors. Surely here, in God's house, he would find compassion. Surely here, on the night celebrating the birth of a child born in poverty, there would be room for a beggar. He climbed the steps slowly, each one harder than the last. His legs were weak from walking, his body ached from cold. His spirit was breaking from rejection. As he reached the top, he could see through the open doors into the sanctuary. It was magnificent, pews made of polished mahogany, an altar covered in gold cloth, Christmas decorations everywhere, fresh flowers, ribbons, candles arranged in elaborate displays. The congregation was dressed in their finest clothes. Rich merchants sat beside government officials. Wealthy families occupied the front rows. King Adebayo stepped toward the entrance, but immediately a figure blocked his path. Father Adewale, the head priest, stood in the doorway. He was an older man, perhaps 65, wearing pristine white and gold vestments. His gray hair was perfectly combed. His hands, folded in front of him, were soft and uncalloused hands that had never known hard labor. The priest looked at the beggar and his nose wrinkled in disgust. "You cannot enter here." The king's voice was weak. "Father, please, I just want to sit in the back. I won't disturb anyone. I just need to rest, to be warm for a moment. This is a house of worship, not a shelter for vagrants," Father Adewale said coldly. His voice was low so the congregation wouldn't hear, but his eyes were hard as stone. "Look at you. You're filthy. You smell. You'll disturb the service and upset our congregation." "But Father, it's Christmas Eve, the night we celebrate God's love for all people." "Surely, don't lecture me about Christmas," the priest interrupted sharply. "I've served God for 40 years. I know what Christmas means. And it doesn't mean turning our sacred space into a homeless shelter." Behind the priest, King Adebayo could see the nativity scene displayed prominently near the altar. Baby Jesus in a manger. Mary and Joseph, who the Bible said were turned away from every inn, forced to give birth in a stable because there was no room for them anywhere. The irony was crushing. Here was the church, celebrating the story of a homeless family finding no room, while turning away a homeless man at their own door. "Father," the king tried one more time, his voice breaking, "I'm not asking for much. Just a corner to sit. There's a shelter 3 miles outside the city," Father Adewale said firmly. "Go there. That's what it's for. Now move along before I call the authorities." He began to close the door. "But Father," I said, "move along." The priest's voice rose, and several people in the congregation turned to look. Father Adewale quickly composed himself, smiled at his congregation, then looked back at the beggar with pure contempt. "Goodbye." He shut the door. Through the thick wood, King Adebayo could hear the choir continue singing, "Oh come let us adore him. Oh come let us adore him." Double quotes. The king sank down onto the cold stone steps. His hands covered his face. He wasn't crying. Kings don't cry, even disguised ones. But something inside him was breaking. Something fundamental was shattering. He had seen wealthy merchants turn away the poor. That was painful but perhaps expected. But the church, God's house, on Christmas Eve. And again, that terrible realization, he had done the same thing. He had donated gold to build this church, yes, but he had also passed laws forbidding beggars from gathering near places of worship. "They make the area look bad," he had said. "They drive away decent people." He was seeing the consequences of his own policies, his own coldness, reflected in every rejection. For the next 2 hours, King Adebayo wandered through the city like a ghost. He knocked on door after door, each time, the same story. Each time, a different face showing the same disgust. He went to the home of a magistrate he had personally appointed. The man didn't even open the door fully. Just cracked it enough to see who was there, then said, "Nothing for you here," and shut it again. He went to the house of a teacher he had honored with an award for service to the kingdom. The woman opened the door, saw him, and literally recoiled. "Get away from here. I have children inside. I won't have them exposed to people like you." He went to the community center where charitable events were often held. A sign on the door read, "Christmas celebration inside, by invitation only." He knocked anyway. A security guard opened it, saw him, and laughed. Invitation only means not you, beggar, move on. At a wealthy woman's estate, he was chased away by dogs before he even reached the door. At a government official's house, servants threw water at him to make him leave faster. At a baker's shop, still open late for Christmas orders, he asked if he could have just one piece of bread, anything that would be thrown away anyway. The baker said, "If I give to you, every beggar in the city will come. Bad for business. Now go before you scare away my customers." Every door closed. Every face turned away. Every heart was locked. The king's feet were bleeding now. The sandals had fallen apart completely, and he was walking barefoot on cold stone streets. His fingers were numb from cold. His stomach had stopped growling and now just ached with a deep, hollow pain. He was experiencing something he never knew existed: absolute poverty. Not just the lack of money, but the lack of human dignity, the lack of being seen as a person, the lack of mattering to anyone at all. As midnight approached, King Adebayo found himself at the very edge of the city. Beyond this point, there were no more wealthy homes, no more decorated streets. Just the slums, the place where the poorest of the poor lived. He had never been to this part of his kingdom, had never even acknowledged it existed. But now, with nowhere else to go, with every door in the civilized part of the city closed to him, he walked into the forgotten area where his desperate subjects survived. The houses here weren't houses at all. They were shacks made of scrap wood and tin, huts built from mud and hope. Structures that looked like a strong wind could blow them away. And there, at the very end of a dirt path, by the light of a single kerosene lamp, he saw something that would change his life forever. A small hut, even poorer than the others, and in the doorway, a silhouette of a woman sweeping her front step. Mama Ayo was 67 years old, and she had known poverty her entire life. Her husband had died 20 years ago. Her children had moved to other cities searching for work. She lived alone in a hut barely large enough to stand up in, surviving on what little she could make selling ground nuts at the market. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, she had almost nothing. Her last meal had been yesterday, a small portion of cassava. She had 1 cup of rice left, saved for Christmas morning. 1 threadbare blanket. 1 change of clothes. A cracked clay pot for cooking. That was the extent of her worldly possessions. But Mama Ayo had something that wealth could never buy, a heart that still knew how to love. She was sweeping her doorstep, humming a Christmas hymn, when she saw him. A man, stumbling down the path, barely able to walk. His clothes were rags, his feet were bleeding. He looked like death itself was walking. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. She dropped her broom and rushed toward him. King Adebayo looked up and saw her coming. His first instinct was to apologize, to move away. Everyone else had been disgusted by him. Surely this old woman would be the same. But instead, she reached out and took his arm to steady him. "You poor man, what happened to you? Come inside. Quickly. I don't want to be a burden," the king stammered. "Burden, on Christmas Eve. Don't be foolish. Come." Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a thin old woman. She practically carried him into her tiny hut. Inside, it was barely warmer than outside, but it felt like paradise after hours in the cold. Mama Ayo helped him sit on her only stool, a 3-legged wooden seat that wobbled. She immediately wrapped her only blanket around his shoulders. "No, please," the king protested. "That's yours. You need it." "Hush now," she said gently but firmly. "You're shivering like a leaf. I'm used to the cold." "You're not." She was already moving to her small cooking area, which was just a circle of stones with a pot balanced on top. The king watched in amazement as this woman who had nothing began to give him everything. She took her cup of rice, her only food, and began to cook it over a small fire she built from scraps of wood. "Please," the king said, his voice thick with emotion, "don't cook that. I can see it's all you have." Mama Ayo turned and looked at him with eyes full of warmth. "Young man, listen to me. I've lived a long life. I've been hungry many times, but you know what I've learned. Food tastes better when shared. Money in your pocket means nothing if your neighbor is starving. And on Christmas Eve, when we remember that God himself came to earth as a homeless baby, how could I possibly turn away someone in need?" Tears began to fall down King Adebayo's cheeks. He couldn't stop them. For the first time in decades, perhaps in his entire life, he wept openly. Mama Ayo came and knelt beside him. She took his dirty, bleeding hands in hers. "It's all right, son. It's all right. Whatever you've been through, you're safe now. You're not alone anymore. While the rice cooked, she heated water in her cracked pot. Then she did something that made the king weep even harder. She knelt at his feet, gently removed the remains of his destroyed sandals, and began to wash his bleeding feet with her precious water. "No," the king sobbed, "please, don't. I'm not worthy of this." "None of us are worthy of grace," Mama Ayo said softly, carefully cleaning each cut, each bruise. "But grace is given anyway. That's what makes it grace." She tore strips from her only spare cloth to bandage his feet. She served him the rice on her only plate, giving him the entire portion, while she claimed she'd already eaten. As he ate the rice, tasting better than any feast he'd ever had in his palace, she sat across from him and asked gently, "What's your name, son?" The king almost said Adebayo, but he caught himself. I don't have a name that matters. Everyone's name matters," she said firmly. "But if you don't wish to tell me, that's all right. You can stay here tonight. I have a mat you can sleep on. Tomorrow is Christmas. We'll figure out tomorrow together." "Why?" the king asked, his voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I could be dangerous. You could be Christ himself," Mama Ayo interrupted gently. "The Bible says when we show kindness to the least of these, we show it to him. But even if you're not, even if you're just a man who needs help, isn't that enough reason?" King Adebayo looked at this woman, this poor, elderly, forgotten woman living in a hut that his palace guards wouldn't even use for storage. And he saw something he'd never seen in all his wealthy advisors, his rich merchants, his powerful priests. He saw the face of God. King Adebayo spent that night on Mama Ayo's floor, wrapped in her blanket, warm for the first time all evening. But he couldn't sleep. His mind was on fire with realization. Every door in his wealthy capital had closed to him. Every rich person, every educated person, every religious leader had turned him away. But this woman, who had less than anyone, had opened her door without hesitation. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, the king knew what he had to do. Mama Ayo was still sleeping, exhausted from staying up late to care for her guest. Carefully, quietly, King Adebayo stood up. His feet still hurt, but the bandages she'd made helped. He looked at her sleeping form, so thin, so tired, but so peaceful. He reached under his rags and pulled out the wooden cross Baba Tund had given him. He placed it gently beside her, along with a torn piece of cloth on which he wrote with charcoal from her fire, "Thank you for showing me what it means to be human. You saved more than my life tonight." Then he slipped out into the Christmas morning. The walk back to the palace took hours. By the time he arrived, it was mid-morning. He went straight to his chambers through the secret entrance. Baba Tund was there, waiting anxiously. "Your Majesty, thank God." "I was worried, Baba," the king interrupted. "Gather the court, everyone, now. I don't care that it's Christmas. Tell them their king commands their presence immediately." Within an hour, the throne room was filled with confused nobles, advisors, and officials, all wondering why they'd been summoned on Christmas Day. King Adebayo entered, and everyone gasped. He was still wearing the beggar's rags, his feet were bandaged, his face was dirty, he looked like he'd been through a war. He climbed the steps to his throne but didn't sit. Instead, he stood before it and addressed his court. "Last night, I walked among you as a beggar. I knocked on your doors, I stood before your churches. I asked for help from the people I thought were the pillars of this kingdom." The room went deadly silent. Several people turned pale, realizing what had happened. "Adekunal," the king said, pointing to the merchant, "you called me worthless and threatened to have me beaten. Father Adewale," he turned to the priest, who stood in horror at the back, "you turned me away from God's house on Christmas Eve. Each of you, in your own way, showed me exactly what you think of the poor and suffering." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But there was one person in my entire kingdom who showed me kindness. An elderly widow named Mama Ayo, living in a hut on the edge of the city. She has nothing, less than nothing, yet she gave me everything she had. Her food, her blanket, her dignity, her love." Queen Folake stood in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, proud of her husband in a way she hadn't been in years. "I am ashamed," King Adebayo continued, his voice breaking. "Ashamed of who I have been, ashamed of what I have allowed this kingdom to become. We have wealth, but we have no heart. We have churches, but we have no Christ. We celebrate Christmas, but we have forgotten what it means." He descended from his throne platform and stood at eye level with everyone. "Effective immediately, I am making new laws. Every Christmas Eve, the palace gates will open. Every beggar, every orphan, every widow, every forgotten person in this kingdom will be invited to feast. And I will serve them myself, my hands, my labor. Shocked whispers filled the room. Furthermore, the royal treasury will establish a permanent fund for the poor. Any citizen facing hunger or homelessness can come to the palace for help, no questions asked. No judgment passed, but Your Majesty, an advisor protested, the cost, the cost. The king shouted, "What is the cost of my soul? What is the cost of our humanity? I will sell my own crown if I must." He looked around the room at all these wealthy, comfortable people. Each of you will also be required to serve 1 day a month helping the poor. Not sending servants, not sending money. You, personally, with your own hands. You will know their names, you will see their faces. You will remember that they are human beings, not problems to be solved or nuisances to be removed. Then his voice softened. And I will begin today. Now, Baba, bring Mama Ayo here. Send the royal carriage. Treat her like the queen she truly is. That afternoon, Mama Ayo was brought to the palace. She was terrified, thinking she was in trouble. But when she was led into the throne room and saw the beggar from last night standing in royal robes, her hand flew to her mouth. King Adebayo walked to her and did something that had never been done in the history of the kingdom. He knelt before her. "You saved my life, Mama Ayo, but more than that, you saved my soul. Everything you need for the rest of your life, I will provide. A home, food, comfort, but more than that, I want you here, in the palace, to remind all of us what kindness looks like." Mama Ayo, crying, helped the king stand up. "You don't need to give me anything, my son. Just be the king who remembers what he learned." "I will," he promised. "I swear it." And he kept that promise. Every Christmas Eve for the rest of his reign, King Adebayo opened his palace to the poorest of the poor. He served them personally, washing feet, distributing food, listening to their stories. The tradition became so famous that other kingdoms began to copy it. Mama Ayo lived in the palace for her remaining years, honored and loved by everyone. When she died peacefully 5 years later, the king ordered a national day of mourning. Her humble hut was preserved as a monument, with a plaque that read, "Here lived the woman who taught a king what it means to be human." And every Christmas, without fail, King Adebayo would visit that hut, kneel in the doorway, and thank God for the night he lost everything and found what truly mattered. Because that's what Christmas is really about. Not the gold or the gifts or the grand celebrations. It's about seeing Christ in the faces of the forgotten. It's about opening your door when everyone else closes theirs. It's about giving when you have nothing left to give. Mama Ayo understood that, and she changed the kingdom. May her story remind us all, true wealth isn't measured by what we have, it's measured by what we give. And the poorest person with a generous heart is richer than any king with a cold one. Merry Christmas, and may we all have the courage to open our doors, our hearts, and our hands to those who need it most.